You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm here today with Mitch Joel, who's been a visionary for many, many years, particularly in the areas of digital marketing, but also in traditional marketing before that. So for those of you who know, those of us who do, or those of our listeners who don't know you, Mitch, why don't you give the elevator pitch of who you are and what you're up to now?
Well, first of all, thanks, Kevin. It's good to see you. We first met, I think, when I was helping to launch mama.com, which was one of the first search engines. So, they talk about the OGs. I definitely know when it comes to search, you and I were talking about things that became multi-billion-dollar businesses over the years. Prior to that, I was a magazine publisher primarily and a writer that had put my stuff on the web. But then I quickly moved into this very fortuitous position to help launch all of these ad revenue models that have now really taken over and become into question as well. Did a short stint with a mobile marketing company in a world where there was no interoperability between carriers for text messaging. So that was pre-smartphones, pre-web browsers. Had a record label back to my music industry days. And then in early 2000s, added onto, but launched essentially a digital agency called Twist Image, where I live here in Montreal. Built it with 3 business partners to have a multi-city, multi-office agency model that we sold about 8 years ago to WPP, which became the agency Mirum, which is now part of, I think it's Wunderman Thompson. I don't know, but I left about 3 years ago. And in the beginning days of the digital agency, I launched a blog and a podcast called 6 Pixels of Separation, which led to a book of that name, which led to a second book called Control Alt Delete, and a lot of public speaking. And so now I'm occupying my time, primarily in 3 areas. One is I do a lot of presentations and talking about consumer behavior and innovation. I do investing and advising. And the third is my stealthy startup that is going to probably be less stealthy in the coming months, but right now shall remain nameless.
Well, we'll look forward to watching your LinkedIn and your various other social channels to learn about this new startup. I'm constantly in startup mode myself. So my first question is really, I remember when the book 6 Pixels of Separation came out. Since then, there have been a whole proliferation of social media channels and other online channels. Do you feel like the pixels of separation are fewer or greater since then?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think the premise of, the subtitle of the book is Everyone's Connected, Connect Your Business to Everyone. And if we look at the premise and the philosophy of the book, it still holds. The ability, the world of 6 degrees of separation, which became the joke of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, was a reality. And I do believe that digital technology connected us intimately, as we've seen in terms of dating apps, as we've seen in terms of polarization because of politics. So it has stood up. There's no doubt that we are still all interconnected. What doesn't stand up is, in that model, I believed, maybe foolishly or naively, that every seed would create a flower or a tree that would blossom and grow, and that we wouldn't necessarily be in an essentially a monopolistic media world again. I didn't see coming. I really thought that the newer players at the time, your Googles, your YouTube, your Facebooks, would really open up a whole new way for brands to connect to more targeted and relevant viewers, consumers, whatever the world looked like. I don't know why I was so naive to not think that it would have had mass consolidation and then massive market caps that would then change the dynamics and engines of the world, which we're seeing play out right now, really in real time. So yes, I think we're all still intrinsically connected, but I don't necessarily think it's as Pollyanna as I thought it would be in the books.
Yeah, I remember in 94 through 96, I had this idea that the internet would be the great equalizer.
Yeah.
And it didn't take me long to realize that it was quite the reverse, right? And for me, the epiphany was the fact that the bigger organizations would have far more data on which to act and react in marketing than the smaller ones. And that would allow these cumbersome big organizations to be actually more nimble in the internet world than they could even in the traditional world, where data was slow to get back to the data holders in silos and such. So it was fascinating, because that was my wake up call that no, it's not the great equalizer.
Well, I think, to a certain degree it is, though. I mean, we could look at, for example, let's take Shopify, where I have, again, really great relationship and know the founders and knew them when they were just starting it. If we look at that and we go, well, this is another unregulated monopoly, even though I don't think it is, but if we look at it in that perspective, the truth is it is still empowered millions of people to go from, I don't know what I'm going to do, to I can actually start and build a business and sell a business. Now we could look at YouTube in the same way and look at their billions of dollars in revenue and the issues they have with moderating content, et cetera. But we can also look at it and go, look how many creators it has created, and look how many new businesses or even industries that have come out of that. And you could argue about things like the influencer industry, the education industry, the content creating industry. So even within the monoliths that are controlling a lot of the media dollars or even the market capitalization and public dollars, it's hard to not argue that it has created a tremendous energy around creating. And that includes businesses. I mean, I can't imagine how many businesses would not have been started if there wasn't the ability for them to advertise with Google or YouTube or Facebook or whomever, or if a place like Shopify didn't exist for people to just start a business. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember that when somebody wanted to do e-commerce, that was a multi-million-dollar, multi-year endeavor. And the fact that you can hop onto a platform now and be live in 20 minutes, if you're doing one product as an example, is very real. And so again, industries have been created. So one is we look at the public world, we look at the media world, but if we look at how it has empowered or enabled, it's really true. And then access too. I mean, access is very real. I'm connected to a particular group of people with similar interests through things like private Facebook groups or LinkedIn that I would never have had access to. And that on this journey, in particular with my startup that I'm working on, when I think about who I have access to and who I'm connected to, were it not for the internet, I don't know that I would have that access or that ability. So I think we have to parse that concept in two ideas in terms of like the business and their revenue versus the impact it's had on individuals.
Absolutely. Great point. Great point. Obviously, like many other businesses, you've had to transform your business over the last couple of years into more of a hybrid speaking engagement and hybrid advisory. For those businesses who haven't really found their footing yet and are still sort of off balance as a result of sort of the evolving new normal, what is your advice to those businesses?
I mean, I don't know, because it's insane out there. This K-shaped recovery isn't just about businesses, it's about people. And I think there's a lot of businesses that, had you told me about a global pandemic in February or January of last year, and pool companies are going to do great, I would have thought you've lost your mind. And then there are other companies where you would think, well, they're just going to keep on going because it's consumables and people need them. And then no, it doesn't work because they happen to sell to, example would be an old age home, and suddenly they're all closing down, or there's problems with them because people can't access them because of it. It is and has been absurd. So my advice isn't necessarily directly to that, but my thought would be like, let's take it in the world of speaking. So physical events shut down, all travel shuts down, all businesses shut down. And I'm in a unique position where, communications digitally wasn't exactly earth-shattering to me. I'd known what Zoom was. I have cameras and gear. I've been recording a podcast for close to 20 years, and I'd been on YouTube. I've done the rounds. So for me to be set up to now deliver virtually was a shift in terms of physical performance versus a broadcast performance, but it wasn't something that was new domain to me because I had been doing my radio hits and my TV hits and my media components of it. Now, watching some of my peers come out and present because they bought a webcam and a ring light like they've invented the wheel, that was a little bit more absurd to me. This, like, I've got a whole new thing that I'm doing here because, to someone who's done broadcast and media and understands the concept of positioning and framing and quality of photo and lighting and all this audio and all this stuff, I just looked at it like, okay, you added a webcam, but that's not really innovative. So for me, when I transpose that into the bigger sense of the world, what we saw was a lot of forced innovation. Stores really having to figure out online ordering, pickup, delivery, curbside pickup, customer service in a different way, managing emails and communications, managing teams that are dispersed. So we picked up a lot of great skills. My fear and concern for those who went through this is when we come out of this and we are in varying phases and geographies and all that sort of stuff, are we going to do away with these amazing tools and ways in which we could connect to our consumers, or are we going to embrace them and possibly find new business models within them, new levels of service and engagement that obviously consumers had to do, but maybe now that it's become somewhat habitual, there's a real opportunity there.
That's a great point. I know I've certainly received more requests for marketing audits and media audits in the last year than I had probably in the prior 10 years. And it was almost like it took that shock to the system for these businesses to realize their marketing plans and media plans were probably wrong. Now, they had probably been wrong for 4 years prior to the pandemic as well, but it was sort of transformative. The transformation of the landscape just was a wake-up call to them. Had you found the same in your sort of advisory work, that there were some businesses that perhaps had already been broken, but it took the shock of the pandemic for them to realize that they had to change?
No, I mean, my advisory works primarily in this world. So these are people who are constantly trying, to disrupt that. So I don't really see it. And again, my advisory work is very minor in the grand scheme of things. But, when we think about how they're thinking about what that means, or if we think about what media, like let's take media would be a great example, actually. So what was the big, I would say the biggest learning we saw, at least I saw, is local advertising was considered the last mile. Like we need to nail that. And if you looked at national or international brands, they've struggled with that forever. And it's been a big challenge. And we knew that to be a very opportunistic place to be, a very personalized, hyper local, big areas. If you think about what happened during the pandemic, like all of their regions shut down in different ways. They were reopening in different levels of access, and they nailed it. A lot of these big brands nailed local, hyper local advertising. And you'd say, if you even look simplistically at Facebook, you saw it. Like you would know based off of the store in your region what their opening hours were, what the code was. You have to wash your hands, you have to wear a mask, all that sort of stuff. So to me, it was very inspiring to watch national and international brands finally nail that last mile. And again, out of necessity, they had to do it, but now they have it. So the question becomes, now do you continue advertising at that level with the right prices, right space? We'll see if they're smart enough to take those learnings and transcend with them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering if that really ended up being a tailwind for those hyper-local content platforms like Nextdoor. I don't know if Nextdoor is as active in Canada.
It's not, but I'm familiar with it. But yeah,
here. But I mean, they certainly, to some extent, were an updated version of Craigslist, right?
Yeah.
And Craigslist, of course, continues to chug along amazingly, right? Even the user interface hasn't changed.
Yeah, but Facebook marketplaces.
Yeah.
If you look at even Shopify doing their shop app, there's been a lot of people and places. I mean, look, I'm a comic book nerd, and locally there's a small shop that opened up. And again, these aren't, the comic book shops are not big businesses. These are real small entrepreneur-run businesses. And watching this small business build a 300 plus community on Telegram, where they start building sub-communities for buying and selling comics. So not even stuff you're buying in the store, but let's help these communities sell to one another. He created a local community just for regionally to Montreal because he had international clients that were buying from him suddenly, to then doing Facebook Lives every day. Basically, they're on Facebook Live and they are selling books. And it's amazing to see because, look, if you know that business, to get 20 people in your store one time is, you're rock and roll. Every day, 40, 50, sometimes 100 people are in there bidding on different types of books. They're providing information in the comments. We're building community because we're connected to one another and we're sharing. And there are people from all over the world, not just locally, building an international customer database. And I look at things like that and go, Like, wow, how brilliant is that? He's essentially running two businesses, one physical location. And out of that physical location, he's running this store almost, a couple hours a day to this. I'm building community around it. So when I think of, what platforms cater to local, I think it's the inverse that fascinates me more, Kevin. The fact that you could use these global platforms to really connect people. And look, I was very hesitant to do the Telegram thing, and I've become friendly with this entrepreneur. I don't want another messaging app. Like, I just don't need the headache. And I did it begrudgingly. And I have to tell you, it's a homepage app that when I need that little getaway to see with some of my peers and what's for sale, and maybe I'll buy something, or maybe I'll post something, or what's coming out every Wednesday, because that's the big day. It's great. And during a place of time like a pandemic, you feel connected. You can even see that in terms of Clubhouse. Now, we can talk about the overall value of the platform, but during the pandemic, it was really interesting to watch these communities bind over voice, live voice, many people at the same time. And what immediately happened, which I could have, thrown a dart at before it even started, is the localized or the niche-based rooms. So you suddenly had, I live in Montreal, like Montreal mornings and hanging out with other people in Montreal on audio. Then you saw the niches come in, the marketers, you saw the AI people, the retail people, all with very interesting rooms that you could hang out in, and small communities. These weren't massive rooms with thousands of people. You'd be in a room with 40, 50 people. So that to me speaks more to the power of it. How do we leverage this mass global tech that has millions or billions of people on it and really mobilize locally? Totally doable. Really great to see.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned the hyper-local element of Clubhouse and how that evolved. But to some extent,
but Facebook too. Facebook too.
That and other platforms, they almost replaced Meetup.
Oh, Kevin. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it's like in your world. I've got young kids and they're in different schools, and there are Facebook groups that are just for parents. And so if the school is withholding information on, what grade had COVID, or they don't want to reveal it because they're not allowed, in that group is like, oh, it's our grade, not necessarily naming kids, but like they have books for sale. Sometimes parents are coming in and they want to lease their apartment out because they're moving back to wherever they came from. I think about the power. Again, you're on Facebook, a multi-billion-dollar platform, but it really is regional. I don't know, again, where you live. In my neighborhood in Montreal, there's 2 or 3 groups that cater to it. One for kids. So what should you do with kids in the area? One for just anybody who likes the area. And it's amazing to watch and see how this community mobilized better than City Hall or the local library could in their own way. So again, like to me, those are like the whole meetup thing, or again, the platform that forces local versus letting people mobilize where they are, night and day.
Well, we all got to see the Facebook outage recently. It just so happens that's very recent for us doing this conversation. And I thought it was really fascinating to see the different spin that was put on it by different media types, both within the advertising and marketing community, as well as within the mainstream media, right? Obviously, it coincided with a period where Facebook's power was under intense scrutiny, its power to have negative outcomes. But the point you were making is its power to have positive outcomes on communities is also really incredible, right? And then we saw the plug get pulled inadvertently, right? And so we got to see a day without Facebook or Instagram. And has that changed how you think about the platform from its sort of importance to communities, or from its power to potentially, like the Force has a dark side and a light side?
You've been around the business maybe longer, and you're probably a lot smarter than I am. And you know that any form of innovation or technology can be used for both good and bad. And that includes fire. Right? We need it to cook and stay warm. It can also torch things to the ground. Yeah, my perspective on, one is, let me frame it by saying, one, I'm not a Facebook apologist. One. Two is, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. So let me start with those thoughts. I believe in facts and details and matters. I am able, though, to be someone who's very media literate, to look at this whole thing and have a bit of a skewed perspective. And that skewed perspective is, the Wall Street Journal breaks this story, and how many tracking data points do they have on their website? I think it's 40 or 50, someone said in the media. Who benefits the most if Facebook fails? Think about all the traditional media channels where the dollars would be routed back to them. And again, I'm not creating a scene, but it's very easy to punch your enemy in the eye when you have access to audience. So again, I'm not saying Facebook is great. There's no problems with body images. But again, if you look at the arguments that were brought out by the whistleblower, you could really go through them and go like, let's transpose the word Facebook into television or movies or magazines and the issues of what's happening there. Data being just shared that's wrong or false. Young girls having bad image issues. I'm all for that. I mean, this is a world that I really do occupy. But are you going to tell me that magazines haven't been doing that forever, or television shows or movies? I mean, it's the comparison. So are we going to blame Facebook because human beings, individuals are now creating the content that editors and not journalists, but just writers used to create before? I mean, there's a bit of two-sidedness coming out of the mouths of those who are upset about it. Now, should we have a for-profit public company deciding what is free, what type of content should be out there? No. I believe that is something that should be regulated by governments. There's no doubt. So again, I'm not being an apologist and I'm not being a conspiracy theorist, but when I see a lot of this, I'm always like, who is to gain from this? If you see, there was that documentary, I think I'll call it The Social Dilemma or whatever it was called, which was another catalyst. Every single person, their business is to be the contrarian to technology. I mean, that is how they make their living financially. Speaking, writing, thought leadership, jobs, think tanks. So are these people smart? They are. Should they be heard? Absolutely. Is that the only angle? No. I mean, there's other perspectives here. And again, I'm not saying for all the bad, there's the good. I just look at it and I go, okay, I'm in charge of Facebook. How do you fix this? How do you fix a place where billions of people are able to really post essentially what they want? And how do we regulate that? And I know the answer will be AI or algorithmic. We'll just change the algorithm. I mean, I've been in the business long enough to know that whatever algorithm you change will be adapted to by someone who's trying to figure out how to get around it. It's like a tax law. For every tax law you create, there's a million accountants trying to figure out a loophole. Real or not, So again, I'm not being an apologist. There's a tremendous issue here, and there's a tremendous threat to democracy, to politics, to information. But there's also a tremendous threat, I believe, to our ability to retain that it's often not the company, but it's us. That if we did a better job of providing media literacy to younger kids, to parents, to teachers, that if we did a better job of instilling what is shareable versus what isn't, what things should I share that I may have read or may not have read? How do I source information? I'm not concerned with anti-vaxxers. I'm concerned with wellness people who make assumptions, not based on science, but based off of just how I feel, because I think it's great that we're doing these things with, and again, I'm all for it, but we have to be able to level things in a way that's pragmatic. We can't deny science because someone else is very good at doing push-ups or taking protein shakes. And I'm not saying both aren't good. They have their place. So I do empathize a little bit more maybe than the average person does. But on the other side, I'm also a business person. And I look at it and I go, how many years have we been seeing threats to platforms like this? And what has it done? I mean, it doesn't look like people are spending less time there. It doesn't look like people are voting with their wallets and quitting or in any meaningful way. These people are, but in a really meaningful way. Brand security. Remember that brand safety?
Brand safety, yeah.
Brand safety happened in March or April of last year, funnily enough, coinciding with a global pandemic where they were going to cut their marketing anyways. So instead of saying we're going to cut our marketing and create fear in the market capitalization or public markets or private markets, hey, we're doing this because it's Facebook and we're seeing other results and we're doing other things. Where's the brand safety right now? Like, where's the bailing of brands in a world where if you look quarter by quarter, they did better. Facebook did better with advertising, audience, and overall growth. And I know people will question that, but overall, we're not seeing a massive push away from them or other platforms or anything like that. So I'm diatribing here a little, and I apologize, but I want people to look at the different angles and be somewhat impartial. Be a journalist, like just look at it. How has it impacted public markets? How has it impacted usage? How has it impacted other media companies? And the people who are the most critical of it, what is their gain on that? And there are really questionable things that have happened in the media based on that. And the truth is, they would love nothing more than Facebook to go away, because then they get the ad dollars back.
All really great points. You got me thinking that about human behavior, right? And human behavior online versus offline. I think there's definitely a difference in online versus offline behavior, but I think I tend to see it amplified if the person is anonymous. So do you feel like anonymity is potentially what bubbles to the surface, perhaps a willingness to be a little bit more harsh than one would otherwise be? Because I think there are things that, a person would say to one another face to face, and then you compare what they would say to each other online without anonymity. And then if you added anonymity, what does that do to the conversation? What does that do to the kinds of messaging? And is anonymity and maybe the removal of anonymity a solution or something that should be looked at?
I think anonymity for me is a transient state, is how I would say it, Kevin. Meaning, I believe if I have something to say, I should be able to stand behind what it is I want to say. Now, with that, I recognize that some people, that's a white male privilege, as I like to self-identify as male, pale, and stale. I'm a middle-aged white guy in North America who's had tremendous privilege and has definitely benefited from a system. There's no doubt. I mean, I'm able to be empathetic enough to realize that. Now, there are many people in the world who have a voice and want to share something that by actually doing that, it puts them at risk. Anonymity, good, like great. I want to go out and buy something and share it on Instagram. Anonymity, whatever. I am having a psychological crisis and I want to buy a book and analyze and understand what's going on with me. Anonymity, good. And that's why I think anonymity is a transient state. I think there are components and moments where we definitely need it. And then there are components and moments where I believe it should either be public and or anonymized. So anonymity isn't the same as anonymizing. What I mean is you could be on a site and I look for something very personal related to a health item, let's say on Amazon. I don't necessarily want that to be assigned to me, but I'm okay if it's scrubbed and used as a component to say books like this sell well, or there's an issue happening because a lot of people are searching for books like this. So I believe, I'm Canadian, I believe that there's a little bit of benefit in helping others as well, that if it can be used in that way. So to me, it's not an either or, it's not a left or right, it's not it's not binary. I think anonymity should definitely be a fluid part of how we conduct ourselves in everything. Right? There are moments where I'm happy to be like, here I am at this library, but there are moments where maybe I want to be intimate with my partner in a restaurant, and I don't need that to be broadcast or publicized by my own choice. So I think we need the balance of both, but the problem isn't that. The problem is I may have foregone that right by simply clicking on a terms and service agreement. And I think that's where the problem lies, is like, where am I anonymous? Where am I not anonymous? How is my data being used? What's it being used for? These are the questions that I definitely want solutions for. I mean, if you think about Facebook, right, I can just send it to my friends, but I don't know how you're set up. My whole thing was always, look, I've been a journalist. My role in social is to be personable and not personal. So I'm not into showing family and that stuff. I'm into showing stuff that's related to establishing me continually as a subject matter expert. So I use it as an engine of broadcasting and connection and community. That's what I do it for. So my friends on Facebook are all my friends. I added everybody on LinkedIn, maybe stupidly, but that's what I did from day one that LinkedIn was around. Now, other people want to curate it so they really know who they are. But by just doing that, you are creating a very different profile of yourself than I am. I mean, it's very clear where you live, who you're connected to, how they're connected, what. So we have to understand that through our following, our likes, our shares, we are establishing this weird profile that, one, we should have control over, but I don't think we really understand.
Yeah, it is interesting to see. I also tend to use Facebook probably 80% business, right? So I have a similar Facebook footprint to my LinkedIn footprint. Right. It is really interesting to see that.
But people like you and I are creating content, and we're trying to establish that. Most people have a job and they want to just share pictures of their kid, and that's great. And I love that. I love seeing it. I just look at it also and go, you're creating profiles. I mean, this next generation are going to be from cradle to whatever on Facebook, whether they knew it or not, like without having a profile. And that's something that I deeply reflect on, especially when people are like, oh, I don't want to like sign up for that thing because I don't want them to have my email address. And I'm like, you're on Facebook, literally showed the baby the second it came out of your body. And now it's like, I've seen your child go from 0 to 17 day by day, and that they don't even need a Facebook profile for me to understand when they were sick, what happened, when they went to school, when they didn't, where you live, what your profile might be like for insurance or medical. I mean, that's a reality. So that is where I'm thinking about anonymity and community and what we're doing in a very different way.
Absolutely. Do you feel like, I mean, it used to be, when we first got into digital, people only experienced brands in a non-digital environment. And they started to experience them more and more digitally. And of course, particularly during the pandemic, people in some cases were experiencing brands only digitally and barely physically, right? So do you feel that has changed sort of experientially how people interact with the brands? I mean, and are brands ready for that?
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, now you're hitting on my sweet spot. Like this, I'm going to break into keynote now. This is exactly what I do. So let's talk retail as a way, because it is a simplistic way that's universal that we can all understand. So physical retail was a real social experience. Yes, some people parked their car and beelined in and didn't want to get any of the DNA of retail on them, but the vast majority of people who physically shop, it is experiential and to a larger degree. Right? And if you think about digital and e-commerce, yes, I mean, there's the data, right? The 30-30, that we are at 15% of overall commerce spend, and it went to 30%, which we thought would happen in 2030. It happened in a couple of months. We rocketed to 70 or 80% at one point, and now we're going to hover around 30. So we did that. We had, I call it the great compression, where it happened within this short period of time. But if you think about it from a user experience perspective, e-commerce was very transactional. I mean, it's amazing to think that Amazon, 20 years plus now, I think, we haven't changed much of the format. It's like you hop on the page, picture, header, description, couple of reviews, and then some added stuff, maybe some more pictures, galleries, whatever. Hasn't really changed. So pandemic strikes, and again, it's really fascinating. The physical stores suddenly get very transactional. You got to wear a mask. They're taking your temperature. You're wiping your hands with Purell. You're getting in line. You can't touch anything. They're building out, in Canada, we had a lot more than the US, but the contactlessness touching of the credit card, that was pervasive here. So that was great. But I know in the States, that was a massive, an acceleration of that for retail in particular. And so here you are in a world where, wow, physical commerce became extremely transactional. And because so much shifted to digital, you suddenly started seeing new ways of buying digitally. So now we're going to do experiences digitally. We're going to think about how we market it and how we productize it in a different way. And to me, when you and I have been talking about this idea of omni-channel in retail forever, and it just suddenly, it was forced to happen, where physical had social components of it, communal components of it that now went very transactional, and transactional digital added in elements of experiential and service-based other experiences to bring that together. And I really do feel that when I think about it, that is a great example that all of us can learn from and how we adjust it. And then you can micro it down to, we have a little market down the street where you buy, prepackaged food and your fruits and veg and some baked goods. And, pandemic hits, doors close. Can't go in, nothing's happening. And then suddenly it becomes, like you can email or call in the order. Within a week, they had a Shopify store and they're doing online ordering, make it easy on their team, right? Because they're taking email orders, it's getting confused in the phone calls, who's coming in what. Now they have an order system that they're using through Shopify. And you think about that was never really the market for them, but it forced them to now have this thing. And now it's a new component where people can do both things, right? I can order online, pick up in store, then walk the aisles and see what's fresh and touch and do whatever I want to do. I love that. So to me, I feel like a lot of businesses started realizing in this moment that I prefer to call the Great Compression than a global pandemic, this amazing opportunity to think differently, not even about experience, because we were on this weird experience path forever. It's about the chief experience officer and what experiences you have. I really think that if we learned anything new during the pandemic, it's that services are the new experience, and that businesses that sell products had to really figure out new levels of services, and service-based businesses needed to figure out more services to add on top of the services. So, another quick example would be like, I don't know if you got a pandemic puppy or kitten or anything like that, but obviously many people did. And so Walmart is tracking, the sale of pet food, pet toys, accessories, things like that. They're selling pet insurance now. Brilliant. Like, that's exactly the world. Start selling services that don't require physical space, that add value, that brings the person connected. We just recently had the 10-year anniversary since Steve Jobs passed, which means it's also the 10-year anniversary since Tim Cook took over. Go look at it. He did great. 600% up in market capitalization. We thought the company was dead. If you look at where they're generating a lot of revenues, I think it's 50 plus billion in services, and services are driving loyalty to the physical products. There's a lot of really powerful learnings in thinking about that duality between what's digital and what's physical that really manifested itself in this moment.
The excellent points. You, as you were talking about that, it had me think about, the pundits have been saying that the marketing funnel is dead for a long time, but it's still a way that marketers like to think about stages of the buying cycle. And during the Great Compression, as you call it, certainly the buying funnel got even more complicated, right? And it's if it even existed anymore. So do you find that there's an alternative framework to think about sort of this idea, like people are going through different stages of the buying cycle, from early awareness through consideration and then the final purchase, given that it's a different omni-channel, and now you've got the service layer on top of it, and that may impact the final brand choice, not so much as the product different, but will I get a different level of service with this particular product versus that product? Is the funnel, can the funnel be adapted to reflect sort of this new world?
I think the biggest adaptation to the funnel has been the two-way bargain between who is good. So like Uber would be a great example of that, right? We're not just rating the drivers, but they're rating us. And that's creating a different level of access. Oh, this person has close to 5 stars, no problem. Or this person's a 3, I'm going to drive by. And suddenly now your behavior is going to be based off of how you're productized and then what services you get offered. To me, that ability to rate the customer is actually really interesting. I'm not going to fly in the face of what I said before about anonymity and those things, but it's an interesting way to think about, if you anonymize this, who is I don't ever, the customer's always right. No, the right customer is always right. So who's the right customer? Oh, so now we're starting to get to a place in this mix where we're able to really see what a right customer is. So when I do advise, ad hoc friends who may be struggling. And when I start looking at, how well they adapted to digitization, how open they are to innovation, how open they might be to just selling it and actually, working for somebody, it's unique. And you start seeing the personality, and you start realizing that for some people, it's not anything other than they don't want to change. And so if a business doesn't want to change, we have a problem. But what if a customer doesn't want to change? That's been the bigger thing for me when I'm looking at businesses today. Can you create a place where you can really get consumers to see another path or another way? So let's go back to pandemic world and the Great Compression. Amazon wakes up one morning and suddenly things that were going to come the next day are going to take 2 weeks to 3 months. Remember that moment?
Yeah.
Probably around maybe April, May last year. So here we are looking down the summer. We got young kids. We're like, we need to pack the garage with all the toys they might want to play with, because they may not be going to camp. We may not be able to do things. And so I'm looking at scooters. Can't find, Amazon's like, again, 2 months out or 6 weeks out. So now I'm shopping to another retailer. This retailer's got curbside pickup. Now, again, you're in the States. Curbside pickup is very ubiquitous. It's been there for a while. In Canada, it's been a little bit slower to adopt for a myriad of reasons. We have a couple of major cities. They're dispersed over a much larger geography. It's a harder system to get to put in place. And so I'm shopping a new retailer that I don't predominantly shop. And again, ordered it, ready in 7 minutes. I go pick it up. I call a number. The person comes out, masks and gloves during the height of the pandemic, drops it into my trunk. I leave. I'm a customer. Like I'm all in on that. So I do believe that you can change and see the shift, but two things had to happen there. One is the business had to adapt to the change. And then I had to adapt to the change. This wasn't a brand that I knew to do this service. So they weren't on my radar for it. I was open to this new way of, call it shopping or delivery or acquisition. We call it acquisition too. That it doesn't really matter. So to me, that answers the question in a story-based way.
Right. So, final thoughts. What are you focused on other than your startup? From a thinking perspective, you feel like you have another book on the horizon? Do you feel like
I don't know. I don't know. I still believe that I'm producing a lot of content. It's changed, the writing every day and posting on the blog, the weekly podcast. So the weekly podcast continues. I believe it's the longest running business podcast in the world, but it changes, the guests, the types of content, it evolves. I like creating content that does have an angle of audio or video to it. So I do a couple radio hits a week, and one of them I post every week. So I'm working on that. I have a weekly link exchange that I've been doing with two other thinkers, one of them more in the academic literary space, one of them really more in the bigger tech, heavier problems. And every week we each share a link with one another. So it becomes 6 links that everybody can have access to. And so I'm really passionate still about that. When I think about a book, I have a bit of I don't know. I don't think right now is a great time for at least my world to be trying to get a book in market and trying to get it sold the way that the market has changed. But I do believe that there's so much content and that I'm creating a lot of content that it might inevitably, birth a book, but that's not on my radar. I mean, my real time is spent thinking about things like this. How can I connect, my ideas to a larger audience? What are the opportunities from an investment standpoint, which is always there? And then the bigger one, again, just really, what it's like to start a business and run a business. It's, I keep saying that I'm using muscles I haven't used in 10 years because those are the old muscles.
Absolutely. Well, it's been great catching up, and I do look forward to seeing what the startup is. I feel like I'm always in startup mode in one form or another with the nonprofit and the recent acquisition of the e-marketing association, of course, and did its continuous pivots. So thank you so much for sharing your views.
Well, Kevin, listen, I've always been a fan of your work. And whenever it came to building digital and speaking to brands, I would often refer to your thinking. And, we'd run into each other a couple times a year. And I'd always, do my I'm not worthy, Wayne and Garth move on you. So I'm just a big fan of all that you're doing. And thank you for all the work you do.
Likewise, I've always, you've been a visionary since the early days. And I think that's great because you've always been trying to look further ahead than most other people are.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.